In his house, he seated him on the sofa and invited him to exercise before eating. Initially, he refused, but because he was so beautiful and charming, he eventually agreed. He can't believe that becoming a butler was just an excuse to do this with him. Flashback to a few months ago. Lee Jin-won, 29 years old, was unemployed and searching for a new job. Lee Jin-won's life had been tumultuous, from his first company going bankrupt in less than 3 months of work to the second company where he was fired for a minor mistake imposed by his supervisor. Currently, he is preparing for a civil service exam and feeling immense pressure. All his hopes rested on this to avoid previous pitfalls. However, fate didn't smile upon him as he fell short by 0.1 points to pass the exam. Failing to achieve the desired result, he resorted to working temporarily in a coffee shop, trying to change his fate. While many could easily recognize this, he didn't want to burden his sister and didn't want to leverage family connections to achieve something. During a meal, breaking news unexpectedly reported a 10-fold increase in the difficulty of the LV9 civil service exam. This news stunned and saddened him as he was only 0.1 points away from passing. Without much delay, he decided to take on extra work for income and explore new opportunities. During a conversation with his aunt and sister, he was advised to seek additional employment. His sister emphasized the importance of stability in marriage being tied to a stable job. He blamed his sister, but she remained cheerful and confident that she had found the right job for him. Following her advice, he visited another house, where he met a handsome young man waiting. He introduced himself as Jin-won, the brother of your dad's wife. The young man suddenly referred to him as uncle, making him realize that he had become the uncle of his sister's stepson. Then the young man said, "Don't call yourself as my uncle witch's brother." Lee Jin-won was startled to hear rumors that the young master and his sister weren't getting along, but he hadn't anticipated the young master's prickly demeanor. Without waiting for Lee Jin-won to say much, the young master called him in to work immediately because he was hungry. Lee Jin-won asked if the young master was Gyunga, then said, "I'll start preparing dinner after I finish unpacking and need to go grocery shopping." The young master stood up, approached Lee Jin-won, and said, "You shouldn't go around calling anyone by their name, because the young master doesn't like strangers being too familiar." Calling him by his name made the young master uncomfortable because it was a privilege of the wealthy. Lee Jin-won asked what he should call the young master, and the young master confidently replied that he should call him master. The master said that since Lee Jin-won came here to be a butler, he should address the young master as such. The master warned Lee Jin-won that if dinner wasn't ready before he finished bathing, he would be angry. He turned away, leaving Lee Jin-won with a bewildered expression. Lee Jin-won had to endure the discomfort of serving in the household of the bourgeoisie. Lee Jin-won's sister talked about family life. "My husband has a child with his previous wife, and that child doesn't like me." My husband's sister and his family supported Lee Jin-won's sister, but Gyunga didn't accept Lee Jin-won's sister. Lee Jin-won understood why Gyunga didn't like his sister, as she was older than Gyunga and became his stepmother. Lee Jin-won's sister talked about Gyunga leaving and seeming to have found a new place with his own bank card. A few days ago, Gyunga had listened to Lee Jin-won's sister, so she thought Gyunga was more open to her. But on Gyunga's birthday, he disappeared. Lee Jin-won encouraged his sister, but Lee Jin-won's sister talked about the difficulty of accepting Gyunga's rejection. She felt sorry for Gyunga's father, who wanted to organize a birthday dinner for his son. Lee Jin-won endured to help his sister, even though Gyunga didn't want it. After dinner, Lee Jin-won looked at Gyunga for a long time, making Gyunga uncomfortable. Gyunga asked Lee Jin-won, "Why are you looking at me like that?" Lee Jin-won said, "Because I find you handsome and gentle, unlike your father." Gyunga said, "Because I'm like my mother," and felt like Lee Jin-won was meeting a celebrity. Lee Jin-won switched to talking about Gyunga's height, and Gyunga seemed unhappy, telling Lee Jin-won that he was just bothering Gyunga. Lee Jin-won apologized and got up to leave. Lee Jin-won found it difficult to persuade Gyunga to make it to their morning appointment on time. Thinking about this, Lee Jin-won turned back and saw Gyunga standing behind him. Upon arriving, Lee Jin-won saw Gyunga with a red mark on his lip, and his shirt torn from the fight. Lee Jin-won handed Gyunga his belongings and then scolded Gyunga vigorously. Lee Jin-won yelled at Gyunga, "You didn't even visit your grandpa when he was discharged from the hospital. Now you've been arrested for fighting. I thought you had stopped acting like a child, but I didn't expect you to get into fights." As Lee Jin-won was reprimanding Gyunga, a police officer intervened and said that Lee Jin-won had misunderstood Gyunga. Gyunga was actually attacked by these two individuals. Seo Jaeung-ha had gone to this girl's house for dinner and was attacked by her boyfriend, believing that Gyunga and the girl had done something behind his back. After everything was sorted out, Gyunga changed clothes, and then Lee Jin-won took him home and forgave the other two. Lee Jin-won asked Gyunga if he knew the girl, to which Gyunga replied no. Then Lee Jin-won said, "So you just went there to eat then?" Gyunga said, "That's right, because you took my card, so I had no choice but to eat there." Getting into the car, Gyunga told Lee Jin-won not to misunderstand and explained that he had planned to have dinner and return before 10 o'clock. In reality, he didn't know where else to go. He said this was a situation he hadn't anticipated, so he couldn't do anything about it, and it wasn't like he trusted everyone to go to their homes. Seeing his mistake, Lee Jin-won apologized to Gyunga. He apologized for what he said at the police station, admitting he shouldn't have yelled at Gyunga like that. Gyunga looked at Lee Jin-won and said, "You don't need to apologize to me. I don't care what you think or what happens. I will just tell your sister about it. I don't want to be scolded for things I didn't do. It makes me feel like there's a battle raging inside me." Lee Jin-won sighed and said, "My life isn't easy either." He asked Gyunga, "Do you feel like you're going through a hard time? Then why don't you try putting yourself in my shoes right now? My duty is to protect someone like you, so why should I report back to my sister?" Gyunga turned back with an incredulous look as if to say, "What is this guy talking about?" "Exactly," Lee Jin-won continued. So Lee Jin-won hoped that Gyunga wouldn't see him as inferior in the future. Upon arriving home, Lee Jin-won had hoped things would be different, but everything remained the same. Gyunga kept complaining, and Lee Jin-won kept being awkward. Then Lee Jin-won thought to himself, Gyunga is still a brat with an unpleasant face. The next day, Lee Jin-won had never seen Gyunga eat without complaining. He always ate right on time, chewing each bite over 20 times. It was impressive. After school, Gyunga went straight home and went to bed at 11 o'clock. Seeing this, Lee Jin-won felt confused and questioned his existence, wondering if Gyunga was a human or a robot. Lee Jin-won replied, "Yeah, I was thinking of organizing a small drinking party. It seems like a good opportunity for everyone to get to know each other better. Drinking is also a good way to relieve stress and create a cheerful atmosphere." Gyunga said, "But I told you I don't drink, right?" Lee Jin-won looked at Gyunga and said, "That's right, but not drinking doesn't mean you can't participate. I can arrange alternative drinks for you if you want." After a moment of thought, Gyunga said, "Okay, but don't force me to drink too much." Lee Jin-won smiled. "Of course, I would never force anyone to do something they don't want to do. Let's just have a fun and friendly drinking party." Gyunga looked at Lee Jin-won and said, "Thank you for understanding and accepting. You seem different from before." Lee Jin-won nodded. "We understand each other better now, don't we? Hopefully, things will get better after the party." Lee Jin-won said, "This is the part that I've prepared for you." It was time for Gyunga to change in a new direction, and this is called the world of adults. Gyunga said, "I don't want to drink because I don't like it, and it's not good for me." Lee Jin-won said, "It's okay. You won't drink much." Gyunga even added, "I've never been drunk when drinking." Hearing Gyunga say that, Lee Jin-won's eyes lit up brightly, sparkling and shimmering as if Lee Jin-won had found the love of his life. Despite Gyunga's continuous refusal, Lee Jin-won remained adamant, wanting Gyunga to drink. It would only stop when Gyunga agreed to drink. Then what happened next? Lee Jin-won got totally drunk. That's what. And Gyunga? Still sober, as stiff as a robot. Gyunga glanced at Lee Jin-won and said, "I wonder how you'll be when you're drunk. I can't imagine it." Saying that, suddenly Lee Jin-won approached Gyunga, gently took their hand, and held it tightly. Then, Lee Jinwon leaned their face close to Gyunga's. Lee Jinwoo asked Gyunga why he disliked Lee Jinwoo's face. Gyunga claimed it was the beer talking, not him. Lee Jinwoo felt like he was stealing Gyunga's girlfriend. The reason Lee Jinwoo was fired from his previous job was because his superior's ex-girlfriend cheated on him with someone who resembled Lee Jinwoo. So Lee Jinwoo thought his face caused trouble. Lee Jinwoo even considered getting plastic surgery. Gyunga disagreed, telling Lee Jinwoo to stop thinking about such things. However, Lee Jinwoo still didn't give up on the idea of getting cosmetic surgery to have a handsome face like Gyunga's. But Gyunga said that girls would prefer Lee Jinwoo's face because he had a very handsome face. Pleased with the compliment, Lee Jinwoo was very happy and continued with his work. Lee Jinwoo took out his books to study, but couldn't focus. He decided to cook something instead. He asked if Gyunga wanted to eat anything, but at that moment, Gyunga was busy talking to his father. Gyunga said he wouldn't come, as he had already given them their own space. What more did they want? He mentioned that his father seemed uneasy again and told him not to say it was because of him. It was all because of his father. He asked his father to forget about him and to live his own life. Lee Jinwoo stepped forward and told him that he thought his behavior was unreasonable. Lee Jinwoo knew he wasn't qualified to give advice, but he believed that Gyunga's father and Gyunga were a good match. No matter how angry he was at his father, he shouldn't speak to him like that. He would surely regret it later. The person Gyunga hated was Lee Jinwoo's sister, not his father. Lee Jinwoo said his father had chosen Gyunga's sister, and he mentioned that his father had been lonely and would be happier if they all lived together. Would his father not be happy living with him? He would be happier living with Lee Jinwoo's sister, but Gyunga would rather die than live with her. He hated everything, and his sister made him uncomfortable. Just seeing them made him feel disgusted and want to go mad. Lee Jinwoo approached again, gently tapping Gyunga's forehead to calm him down, as he looked like a child throwing a tantrum because another woman had stolen his father. Children might behave that way, but Gyunga was an adult now, already 20 years old. Lee Jinwoo advised him with what he had and asked if Gyunga had ever thought of trying to understand her. Suddenly, Gyunga left the house and decided he wouldn't change his mind. Lee Jinwoo told him that Lee Jinwoo's sister was very kind, very caring towards him, and Lee Jinwoo wanted him to give her a chance. Lee Jinwoo said he didn't need to worry because Lee Jinwoo's sister had always liked older people, not gold diggers. After Lee Jinwoo's touching advice, Gyunga decided he would go, but not now. He wanted to visit his family on his late grandfather's Memorial Day, and then Lee Jinwoo hugged him gently. The Memorial Day arrived, and Lee Jinwoo prepared everything for him like a couple would. Gyunga said he would be back soon, and then Lee Jinwoo happily saw him off to his own home. At the funeral, Gyunga received attention from everyone, and they hoped he would attend regularly because his grandpa cherished him greatly. Later, his father and stepmother arrived, and he greeted them before they all went inside. He had pondered quite a bit as he watched them happily interacting. After using the restroom and washing his face, he came out to find Lee Jinwoo's sister waiting for him. She said she was glad to see him there and apologized for making him uncomfortable as his stepmother. Gyunga realized that both Lee Jinwoo and his sister were straightforward individuals. Gyunga said he wouldn't avoid her anymore and wouldn't stand in her way either. She smiled and expressed her hope that he would be happy because he was the son of the man she loved. Although Gyunga thought things would make him feel more comfortable, they didn't. Everything felt painful. Returning home with a sorrowful expression, Lee Jinwoo noticed and asked why his face looked so shattered. It was then that Gyunga realized he had loved Lee Jinwoo's sister for a long time, ever since the day he first met her. He felt despondent and began to cry, and Lee Jinwoo sat beside him and comforted him, saying that if he accepted letting go, everything would be okay. That's how life was. Feeling disappointed, Gyunga decided he didn't want to love anyone anymore. Then Lee Jinwoo told him not to be too pessimistic because he never knew who might be his future partner. Lee Jinwoo spoke whimsically and then told him to forget about those things. Gyunga remarked that Lee Jinwoo's words were wonderful, and that night the two shared secrets with each other. Since that day, Gyunga often visited Lee Jinwoo's house. After hearing Lee Jinwoo's deep words, he also knew what Lee Jinwoo would do that day. He enjoyed the feeling of Lee Jinwoo caring for him. When he arrived at his father's house, Younga felt that the house was now truly a home. Previously, Younga's mother often caused trouble for the family. Before their divorce, they would often avoid each other and stay in their rooms. Younga felt that his home at that time was no different from an abandoned house, but he preferred quiet moments like this rather than arguing. Younga had wished that his mother would stay in that room forever. What he had before was not a real family. After finishing the meal, Younga went home and drank beer with Lee Jinwoo, then recounted his terrible meal. He said he had never eaten such a disgusting meal before. In one breath, Lee Jinwoo discovered a very important issue. Younga didn't know what to release meant. Lee Jinwoo couldn't believe it and found it incredibly amusing. According to Lee Jinwoo, about 96% of men usually release, and Younga belongs to the remaining 4%. Seeing this, Lee Jinwoo didn't hesitate to provoke him, but Younga pushed him away and then left. Lee Jinwoo felt he might have gone too far this time, but he also confirmed that Younga's thing was quite large. That night, while Younga was sleeping, Lee Jinwoo suddenly entered his room. When Younga opened his eyes, he saw Lee Jinwoo lying under his blanket. Younga asked Lee Jinwoo what he was doing in his room, and Lee Jinwoo reached out to touch that of Younga's. Younga jerked back and pushed Lee Jinwoo away, but Lee Jinwoo continued to tease him. Then Lee Jinwoo showed Younga what to release meant. Afterward, Lee Jinwoo said, "How dare I do that to Younga?" Lee Jinwoo talked about what caring meant, saying it was a dream, and then in the dream, Lee Jinwoo wished Younga his first experience. Teasingly. Sitting up, his face bewildered and crestfallen, Younga pulled back the blanket, finding his clothes clean, but his underwear wet. He left the room in search of Lee Jinwoo, with a face full of confusion, unable to believe it was a dream. He reached out to touch Lee Jinwoo with his hand. Younga gently pinched Lee Jinwoo's lips and then reached out to check for something, but found nothing he was looking for. Disappointed, he resorted to kicking instead. He was glad that after that night, Lee Jinwoo didn't appear in his dreams anymore. The next morning, after changing clothes, he realized he had lost a shirt button, so he called for Lee Jinwoo. Lee Jinwoo was brushing his teeth, with foam still clinging to his mouth. Seeing this, Younga immediately remembered the dream from the previous night and quickly left. Since that day, Younga felt that Lee Jinwoo looked handsome no matter what he did, even while sewing. Feeling embarrassed, he asked Lee Jinwoo to do it instead, and then he noticed the thread from Lee Jinwoo's mouth, which had been there. Startled, he threw it away and looked for another spool of thread. Determined not to let such a situation happen again, he decided to pour all of Lee Jinwoo's beer into the last can. Lee Jinwoo daringly grabbed it but ended up spilling it all over himself. Seeing such a suggestive scene, Younga disappeared like a ghost. Lee Jinwoo cleaned up until 2 a.m. and then decided to watch TV for entertainment. Unexpectedly, the show turned out to be about pigs, of all things. Thinking back, it had been a while since Lee Jinwoo had done it, and this was the perfect time to do it now. While Lee Jinwoo was doing it, Younga was startled awake and walked out. Upon seeing Lee Jinwoo, Younga thought he would disappear like a ghost, but this time he stayed to watch. Lord, his little brother reacted. Early in the morning, Lee Jinwoo called him to wake up and asked why he wasn't sleeping on the bed but sitting right by the door. This time, Younga thought it was just a dream and that he should do what he wanted to do with Lee Jinwoo and start enlightening his own path. Upon opening his eyes, the disappointment still lingered on Younga's face. He looked down at his pants and they seemed slightly wet, just as he thought, a sign of a wet dream. Lee Jinwoo set out the food, but Younga's eyes kept lingering on him. Younga couldn't believe he had dreamt about Lee Jinwoo in the same dream 3 times. Suddenly, Lee Jinwoo turned to look at him and asked if he wanted more to eat. Lee Jinwoo remembered earlier when he couldn't find Younga's underwear while doing laundry. Lee Jinwoo didn't understand why Younga's underwear would disappear like that, and Younga asked why Lee Jinwoo kept talking about his underwear like that. Lee Jin-won planned to buy a new pair and asked Gyunga what size he would wear. Gyunga said he didn't know, and Lee Jin-won planned to pull Gyunga's pants down to check. Gyunga startled, covered himself, and said he would buy it himself. Lee Jin-won sat down and looked up at Gyunga, noticing a slight blush on his face. Lee Jin-won asked if he was sick, noticing dark circles under Gyunga's eyes and his skin looking worse. Gyunga pushed Lee Jin-won's hand away, saying he wasn't Lee Jin-won's pet, so don't touch him like that all the time. Lee Jin-won said it was a way of showing affection within a family. However, Gyunga pushed him away and Lee Jin-won looked a bit angry, but he had to continue working. As Lee Jin-won washed the dishes, Gyunga opened the door and left. Then he apologized to Lee Jin-won for being so tired these days, which is why he acted like that. Gyunga tried to talk to Lee Jin-won, but he didn't want to talk much because he was still angry. Lee Jin-won decided to show Gyunga that a house should have a roof. Lee Jin-won would show Gyunga that he wasn't someone to be bullied, and Uncle Lee Jin-won had shown his anger by staying silent. In the evening, Lee Jin-won left a note saying his friend had passed the interview, so he went to congratulate them. Gyunga sat there, eating and confiding in his friend. After finishing his overtime, when Lee Jin-won returned home, he saw Gyunga waiting for him on the sofa. Lee Jin-won thought if he passed the exam, he would have very little time to talk to Gyunga. Lee Jin-won said he would stop being angry with Gyunga because he was Lee Jin-won's first nephew. So Lee Jin-won decided to talk straight to Gyunga and make peace. Lee Jin-won said Gyunga came closer so he could pat his head, but Gyunga moved away. Lee Jin-won told him he knew Gyunga was avoiding him and didn't think he didn't know. Lee Jin-won said he showers every day and doesn't smell bad at all. Lee Jin-won accidentally touched Gyunga. Then Gyunga said, "You're getting too close to me, and I can smell you." Lee Jin-won, "I can smell alcohol in your breath." Then, Gyunga immediately remembered his dreams. He muttered that he couldn't do this wasn't a dream. If Lee Jin-won continued to get close like this, he felt like he might do things with Lee Jin-won like in his dreams. At this point, Gyunga couldn't hold back anymore. He leaned in to kiss Lee Jin-won, who startled and pulled away, but Gyunga pulled Lee Jin-won back forcefully and kissed him again. Lee Jin-won pushed him away again. "Oh my God, are you crazy? Why would you do that to me?" Lee Jin-won said. It was only then that Gyunga admitted he always dreamed of such things, and Lee Jin-won was always in those dreams. Lee Jin-won stood frozen for 5 seconds, then asked why Gyunga dreamt of him like that. Gyunga said he didn't know, but he liked kissing Lee Jin-won like that and felt like he could do other things in dreams. Lee Jin-won, too scared, ran into his room and locked the door. The next morning, while taking Gyunga to school, Gyunga told Lee Jin-won not to act like he didn't know anything about yesterday. Lee Jin-won said he didn't know anything at all. Gyunga asked if he needed to remind Lee Jin-won about it. Lee Jin-won didn't know why Gyunga had such dreams, but that didn't mean Gyunga liked Lee Jin-won. Lee Jin-won told Gyunga that he was straight, continuously avoiding the issue. But when Gyunga said Lee Jin-won was very attractive, Lee Jin-won collapsed for a few seconds. Lee Jin-won told him that he was just caught up in the moment. Suddenly, Gyunga called Lee Jin-won by his name. Gyunga liked Lee Jin-won. He was struggling with his emotions, didn't reject his feelings, and didn't think his feelings for Lee Jin-won weren't real. It hurt him. After Gyunga went to school, Lee Jin-won sat in the car with many thoughts. Lee Jin-won thought Gyunga blamed him because he had a face very similar to his sister's. Too tired of this, it could only be solved this way. Lee Jin-won arranged to meet Gyujong and help him move house. Gyujong asked Lee Jin-won what he wanted to eat, and Lee Jin-won asked him back, "Should I get plastic surgery? Do you think your brother could give me a discount?" Gyujong asked what was going on, and Lee Jin-won started telling Gyujong everything, and he was very interested in this story. Then he told Lee Jin-won that he could find his friends and introduce them to each other. Perhaps that person would agree because they are more handsome and younger than Lee Jin-won. Then, Lee Jin-won took Gyunga to a bar and wanted to introduce women to him. Lee Jin-won pulled him in when he didn't want to. Gyunga said he would leave first, and Lee Jin-won pulled him back and begged him. Gyunga softened at his urgent face. He asked Lee Jin-won what he would give him if he followed Lee Jin-won's will. After saying that, Lee Jin-won took him to a corner, kissed him and said to Gyunga, "I've kissed you, so you can." Before Lee Jin-won finished speaking, Gyunga pinned him down and kissed him back. Lee Jin-won gently hit Gyunga, saying, "We're out in public. We can't do that." But wait, didn't Lee Jin-won just kiss Gyunga? Well, there's a difference between kissing on the lips and kissing on the cheek. Lee Jin-won then told Gyunga to quickly come inside, and once inside, they looked around again. Gyunga seemed uncomfortable, saying he didn't like crowds and wanted to leave. Lee Jin-won insisted, reminding him that he promised to stay with him. Gyunga then told Lee Jin-won that he only promised to stay with him for 30 minutes. Lee Jin-won couldn't believe it. A kiss only bought him 30 minutes. Then, Lee Jin-won took Gyunga to the bar and handed him a cocktail. After drinking it, Lee Jin-won pretended to go to the restroom and secretly watched him from a distance. Now that Lee Jin-won had successfully persuaded Gyunga to stay, the most important thing was that no girl approached Gyunga. While worrying about this, 2 girls approached and talked to Lee Jin-won. Lee Jin-won brought them back to Gyunga, but in Gyunga's eyes, there was only Lee Jin-won. Then, one of the girls approached Lee Jin-won and asked him to switch seats with her. Gyunga didn't want Lee Jin-won to switch seats and pulled him back down. The girl seemed annoyed and spoke in a reproachful manner. Then, Gyunga bluntly told her that he didn't like her, didn't like the way she talked, and her perfume was too strong, making him feel nauseous. Regardless of how much she flirted with Gyunga, he had Lee Jin-won. Before he could finish, Lee Jin-won quickly covered his mouth. Lee Jin-won apologized to the 2 girls and explained that Gyunga was drunk and not paying attention to what he was saying. Lee Jin-won invited them for a drink as an apology, but the girl declined, saying she didn't need it and didn't want to meet someone like him. Glancing at the girl, Gyunga said, "Acting like I like her too." Furious, she stormed off. The plan failed. Lee Jin-won didn't know what to do. Meanwhile, Gyunga kept squeezing Lee Jin-won's thigh, commenting on how soft it was. Lee Jin-won grabbed his collar and said, "Are you drunk?" Gyunga insisted he wasn't completely sober. Lee Jin-won turned around to see Gyunga drinking a few glasses. Yeah, a few glasses. Along with an innocent, guilty face, Gyunga handed the bill to Lee Jin-won. Frustrated, Lee Jin-won finished the remaining drinks and ended up leaning on Gyunga. Gyunga took Lee Jin-won to a hotel and sat him down on the sofa. Seeing Lee Jin-won like this, he urged him to wake up and told him to quickly get into bed. He was too drunk, but Lee Jin-won refused to wake up and go. So Gyunga had to support him and put him on the bed. Just as he was about to lay Lee Jin-won down, Lee Jin-won turned around, hugged and kissed Gyunga on the cheek, then pushed him down, accidentally touching that of his. Unable to resist, Gyunga pinned him down and attempted to do that with Lee Jin-won. The 2 of them spent a passionate night together, leaving spectators in awe. Tonight still stretched long, and the 2 of them continued to immerse themselves in their own private space. The next morning, when Gyunga woke up, he saw Lee Jin-won's face with a look of sheer panic. Remembering everything, Lee Jin-won felt too embarrassed, so he hid in the bathroom. When it was time to eat, Lee Jin-won told Gyunga that he misunderstood what happened last night. Lee Jin-won had no intention of sleeping with him because Lee Jin-won didn't feel that way about him at all. Lee Jin-won said if Gyunga wanted, Lee Jin-won could wait. So Lee Jin-won hoped Gyunga would just pretend like nothing happened last night. Gyunga thought Lee Jin-won was an honest person, so did Lee Jin-won sleep with someone else and then reject them? Lee Jin-won said it wasn't like that. Gyunga then asked why Lee Jin-won refused. Was Gyunga just a joke to Lee Jin-won? Lee Jin-won said it wasn't like that. Although they were not blood-related, Lee Jin-won and Gyunga had a familial relationship. How could they date? After going back and forth for a while, Gyunga decided to give Lee Jin-won time, and he would wait until Lee Jin-won started to like him. So Lee Jin-won shouldn't have any absurd ideas and had to stay by Gyunga's side. If Lee Jin-won tried to run away from Gyunga, Gyunga would pin Lee Jin-won down and exhaust Lee Jin-won again. As Jin-won made his way home, The weight of the exam still hung heavy on his mind like a stubborn fog refusing to dissipate. With each step, he replayed the questions in his head, second-guessing his answers and wondering about the outcome. Maybe the score isn't much different from last time. I'm not sure what I did in the exam anymore. The bustling streets around him seemed to blur into a hazy backdrop as his thoughts consumed him. Lost in his own world, Jin-won found himself retracing the events of the morning. The memory of Ginga's words echoed in his mind like a persistent refrain, stirring a curious mix of anticipation and apprehension within him. Ginga said he intended to pick up Jin-won after Ginga finished some errands. Jin-won said, "No need. I can take the high-speed train." As Jin-won was about to leave, Ginga pulled Jin-won's hand back and said, "When you finish the exam, remember to come home immediately. I have something for you." That sentence made Jin-won unable to stop thinking about it during the exam. As he walked, Jin-won's thoughts darted back and forth between the exam and Ginga's mysterious promise. The anticipation gnawed at him, fueling a sense of eagerness tinged with uncertainty. As Jin-won was about to board the train, Liucong, Jin-won's friend, called. Jin-won picked up the phone and said, "Oh, it's you." On the other end, Liucong said, "Huh? Yes, it's me. Who were you expecting?" Jin-won, startled, stuttered and said, "No, I wasn't expecting anyone to call." Liucong asked in confusion, "Are you 20-year-old, huh? Huh? What's going on? Do you have a girlfriend? Right, huh?" Jin-won panicked. "What? No. What are you talking about? Why did you call me? Just to ask that?" The other end of the line replied, "Yes." Jin-won, annoyed, "The train's here. I'm hanging up." The other end hastily said, "Hey, I gave you a lot of useful dating advice. I have to know. Tell me. I want to know." Jin-won didn't want to, so he hung up abruptly. As Jin-won meandered along the familiar streets toward home, his mind buzzed with anticipation, swirling with thoughts of the surprise Ginga had mentioned. I wonder what Ginga has for me when I get back? The idea of a special gift or unexpected gesture sparked a glimmer of excitement within him, mingling with a hint of curiosity. Lost in his musings, Jin-won's imagination took flight, conjuring up wild scenarios of what Ginga's surprise could entail. However, amidst the excitement, a nagging doubt crept into Jin-won's mind. Could Ginga's sudden generosity be a sign of something amiss? Was there a hidden agenda behind the gesture? Jin-won couldn't help but entertain the idea that Ginga's actions might be fueled by loneliness or a desperate bid for attention. After thinking for a while, he concluded, maybe Ginga's gone crazy because he doesn't have a girlfriend. And then all the faults will be attributed to Ginga's little brother. If anything happens, I just need to kick Ginga's but once and I'll be safe. As he turned the corner onto their street, Jin-won couldn't shake the feeling of unease that gnawed at him. The familiar sights and sounds of home offered little solace as his mind raced with conflicting thoughts. Caught between excitement and apprehension, Jin-won braced himself for whatever surprise awaited him behind the door. As Jin-won stepped into the familiar warmth of their home, he noticed Ginga bustling about in the kitchen, his hands deftly moving amidst bottles and glasses. Intrigued, Jin-won approached, curiosity piqued by his brother's unusual activity. "What are you up to?" he inquired, peering over Ginga's shoulder. Ginga turned with a bright smile, his eyes alight with excitement. "I've been practicing making cocktails," he explained eagerly. "I know how much you enjoy them, so I wanted to surprise you with one." However, Jin-won hesitated, feeling a pang of reluctance. He wasn't in the mood for a drink, but he didn't want to disappoint Ginga either. With a gentle push, he nudged the glass away, accidentally causing its contents to spill onto the counter. Instantly, Jin-won regretted his actions as he saw the crestfallen expression on Ginga's face. Guilt gnawed at him, knowing he had inadvertently dashed Ginga's efforts. "I'm sorry," he murmured, his voice tinged with remorse. "I didn't mean to." Ginga's disappointment was palpable as he spoke softly. "It's okay. It's just that it's the first time I've tried making a cocktail." Unable to bear seeing Ginga sad, Jin-won relented. "I'll try it," he offered, mustering a smile to ease the tension. Ginga's face lit up with renewed hope, and he set about preparing another drink with renewed enthusiasm. As Jin-won accepted the freshly made cocktail, he couldn't help but feel touched by Ginga's gesture. The aroma of the drink wafted up, tantalizing his senses, and he took a tentative sip, savoring the blend of flavors. "It's good," he admitted, a genuine smile spreading across his face. But Ginga wasn't finished yet. With a mischievous twinkle in his eye, he produced a small box of chocolates, offering it to Jin-won with a grin. "Here, try this too. I heard it pairs well with cocktails." Jin-won's cheeks flushed with warmth as he accepted the chocolates, touched by Ginga's thoughtfulness. "Thank you," he murmured gratefully, popping a piece of chocolate into his mouth. The sweetness of the chocolate mingled with the lingering taste of the cocktail, creating a delightful sensation on his palate. As Jin-won savored the last sip of the cocktail Ginga had crafted, he couldn't help but marvel at Ginga's talent. The drink was a symphony of flavors, each note perfectly balanced, despite it being Ginga's first attempt. Jin-won found himself pleasantly surprised by Ginga's hidden skill, a testament to his brother's versatility and determination. Suddenly, Jin-won's little brother waved at him, so Jin-won quickly said, "I'm going to take a shower." Then Jin-won silently dealt with it. But Ginga, sensing Jin-won's intention to leave, Ginga reached out and gently held him back, his expression one of understanding and to help Jin-won. As Jin-won lay on his bed, lost in thought, his mind replayed Ginga's words about chocolate and cocktails, a curious notion that had caught him off guard. Suddenly, it clicked in his mind like a puzzle piece fitting perfectly into place. "So that's why they go together?" he mused aloud, his eyes widening in realization as the connection dawned on him. Just then, the door creaked open, and Ginga's voice cut through Jin-won's reverie and asked, "Hyung, did you say you were going to take a shower? Right?" Startled by the sudden intrusion, Jin-won jolted upright, his heart racing as he turned to face Ginga. "What's going on? Why didn't you knock before coming in?" Jin-won exclaimed, a mix of surprise and frustration evident in his tone. He hastily scrambled off the bed, ushering Ginga out of the room with an urgency born of embarrassment, and firmly shutting the door behind him with a resounding thud. During the group meeting in the classroom, Ginga's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, all centered around Jin-won. He found himself unable to concentrate on the discussion at hand. With furrowed brows, Ginga mulled over their interactions, trying to decipher Jin-won's actions and reactions, as if he held the key to unlocking a puzzle. As the discussion droned on, Ginga found himself lost in a reverie, envisioning scenarios where he and Jin-won were more than just brothers, where they shared a deeper connection. He imagined moments of intimacy and shared laughter, his heart swelling with longing at the mere thought of it. Despite Jin-won's guarded demeanor, Ginga couldn't shake the desire to bridge the gap between them, to break down the walls Jin-won had erected around himself. Lost in his own world, Ginga couldn't contain the laughter that bubbled up inside him, his imagination painting vivid pictures of a future he longed to bring to fruition. Unbeknownst to him, his sudden outburst of joy drew curious glances from his peers, who couldn't understand what could possibly be so amusing about their discussion on homework. Attempting to redirect the conversation to his own pressing thoughts, Ginga interjected with a question that had been plaguing his mind. "Hey, how do you ask someone out?" His classmates exchanged bemused glances before offering their simple advice, "Just become a couple." Ginga seemed to absorb that, and just then Jin-won arrived to pick up Ginga. In the car, Jin-won's expression betrayed a hint of genuine surprise as he glanced sideways at Ginga, his brows slightly furrowed in confusion. "I'm surprised. I thought you didn't have any friends," he remarked, his voice tinged with curiosity. Ginga, lounging back in his seat, appeared nonchalant, his features relaxed as he shrugged in response. "Friends? What are you talking about?" Jin-won's surprise only deepened, prompting him to turn fully towards Ginga, his gaze searching for any sign of deceit. "The people you were with just now," he clarified, his voice laced with incredulity. Ginga's response was characteristically cool, a smirk playing at the corners of his lips as he shook his head dismissively. "Huh? I don't know them, he confessed easily, his tone betraying a hint of mischief. I just asked a few questions. But before Jin-won could fully process the unexpected turn of events, Ginga's voice broke through his reverie, drawing his attention back to the present. But Hyung, Ginga continued, his tone suddenly earnest as he fixed Jin-won with a pleading gaze. Cancel all your plans for tomorrow and come to the amusement park with me. As the morning sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the ground, Jin-won and Ginga made their way through the bustling amusement park, the air alive with the sounds of laughter and excitement. Jin-won's eyes darted around, taking in the sight of couples strolling hand in hand, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Wait here for a moment, Ginga exclaimed suddenly, his eyes sparkling with mischief as he dashed off towards a nearby stall. Jin-won watched him go, a curious smile playing on his lips as he wondered what he was up to. When Ginga returned, a mischievous grin tugging at his lips, Jin-won couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. His amusement turned to surprise as Ginga deftly placed bunny ear clips on his head, the colorful accessories perched atop his hair. You look cuter than I thought, Ginga teased, his voice filled with genuine affection. Jin-won's cheeks flushed with embarrassment, his protests falling on deaf ears as Ginga urged him to embrace the playful gesture. Hey, this is strange. This is only for couples in love, Jin-won protested, his voice laced with laughter. But Ginga merely chuckled in response, gesturing towards two guys nearby sporting similar accessories. Those two are wearing them too. Wear it, Hyung. Come on, it's fun, he insisted, his eyes twinkling with excitement. With a reluctant smile, Jin-won relented, accepting the bunny ears with a soft chuckle as he allowed himself to be swept up in the playful atmosphere. Throughout the day, they embarked on a whirlwind of thrilling rides and adventurous games, the excitement palpable in the air as they laughed and joked together. But when they came across the haunted house ride, Jin-won's fear of ghosts reared its head, causing him to hesitate. Ginga, ever attentive to Jin-won's feelings, immediately sensed his apprehension and suggested they skip the ride. Jin-won breathed a sigh of relief, and they moved on to the roller coaster. As they played, Jin-won found himself clinging to Ginga's hand, and as he glanced over at Ginga, he couldn't help but admire how cool and handsome he looked, his features illuminated by the vibrant lights of the park. Finally, as evening descended and the sky exploded in a kaleidoscope of colors, Jin-won and Ginga found themselves atop the Ferris wheel, gazing out at the breathtaking sight of fireworks painting the sky. In that moment, surrounded by the magic of the night, Ginga reached out and gently took Jin-won's hand in his own, his touch sending a jolt of warmth through Jin-won's veins. It's wonderful to go out like this with someone you like, Ginga murmured, his voice soft with emotion. And as Jin-won looked into Ginga's eyes, a fleeting thought crossed his mind. If I weren't Ginga's uncle, would I reject him? But in the midst of the enchanting moment, such thoughts were quickly forgotten, replaced by the simple joy of being together. As they savored the romantic moment atop the Ferris wheel, basking in the glow of the fireworks painting the night sky, Jin-won's heart began to race with a mixture of exhilaration and fear. While they were being romantic, the Ferris wheel had an accident. Due to the height, Jin-won started to panic. Sensing Jin-won's distress, Ginga moved closer, his arms enveloping Jin-won in a protective embrace. With gentle hands, he lifted Jin-won's face, his eyes soft with concern. In that moment, as he looked into Jin-won's eyes, he found himself captivated by the raw beauty and vulnerability reflected in their depths. Unable to resist the pull of the moment, Ginga leaned in, his lips meeting Jin-won's in a passionate kiss that sent sparks flying. The world around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the heat of their embrace and the pounding of their hearts echoing. As the screen burns with the intensity of their connection, the reader's eyes are undoubtedly drawn to the fiery passion igniting between them, their breath catching in their throats as they become swept up in the unfolding drama. With a sense of urgency, Ginga took Jin-won back to the car and continued doing that in the car, but Jin-won hastily said, "We have to go home to doing this." Without wasting a moment, Ginga takes the wheel, his foot pressing down on the accelerator as he navigates the streets with lightning speed. Upon arriving home, Ginga's face is alight with excitement as he declares, "Let's get to work on important matters quickly. We can't wait any longer." With a sense of purpose, they hurry inside, eager to delve into the tasks that await them, their hearts still racing. As soon as they entered the house, they immediately got into it, making everyone curious. The previous part was just a warm-up. Now the dramatic part begins. As Jae-young-ha uttered those three simple words, "I love you," Jin-won felt a flutter in his chest, a stirring of emotions he hadn't anticipated. It was as if a dam had burst, flooding his senses with a rush of conflicting feelings. As Jin-won settled into bed, he couldn't shake the sensation of Gyunga's strong hands enveloping him, anchoring him to the present moment. There was a comfort in the warmth of Gyunga's embrace, a sense of safety that Jin-won hadn't realized he craved until now. But beneath the surface of his contentment, Jin-won felt a twinge of unease, a nagging doubt that refused to be ignored. Despite the tenderness in Gyunga's touch, there was a weight pressing on Jin-won's heart, a burden he couldn't quite identify. Lost in his thoughts, Jin-won couldn't help but question his own sanity. How could he feel this way, torn between the comfort of Gyunga's love and the heaviness in his heart? It was a paradox he couldn't unravel, a puzzle with no clear solution. As sleep finally claimed him, Jin-won drifted into a restless slumber, his mind swirling with unanswered questions and unspoken fears. Little did he know, the journey to understanding his own heart had only just begun. While cleaning up the battlefield, Ji-wan-ji-ha called to ask how Jin-won was doing. Ji-wan-ji-ha was very worried about Jin-won because in the morning Ji-wan-ji-ha kept calling Jin-won, but Jin-won didn't wake up. Jin-won said that Jin-won was okay and Jin-won was very fine. Ji-wan-ji-ha told Jin-won not to worry. Ji-wan-ji-ha wouldn't force Jin-won to date Ji-wan-ji-ha just because they had sex a few times. Even so, Ji-wan-ji-ha will still like Jin-won. Ji-wan-ji-ha knew that Jin-won was in a difficult situation. Jin-won felt during the conversation that he intended to give in to Jin-won, even though Ji-wan-ji-ha was a very stubborn person. Suddenly Jin-won remembered his first love. Jin-won liked a girl and that girl also had feelings for Jin-won. Thinking back, that was funny. When you have feelings for someone, that feeling of disgust gradually becomes more important. Jin-won thinks that he has to solve this problem before Jin-won gets deep into it and can't get out. Jin-won called and told Jin-won's sister to find another housekeeper. After a month Jin-won would quit his job. Jin-won wanted to tell Ji-wan-ji-ha, but seeing Ji-wan-ji-ha so happy, Jin-won didn't dare to say it. While eating, Ji-wan-ji-ha asked Jin-won why he wore a scarf while eating. Jin-won said it was to hide Ginga's hickey, because he found the turtleneck too itchy, so Jin-won chose to wear it. Ji-wan-ji-ha told Jin-won to take it off, because there were only two of them here, so there was no need to worry. Ji-wan-ji-ha looked at the hickeys on Jin-won's body and felt they were beautiful. When facing this face of Ji-wan-ji-ha, Jin-won lost his reason. Perhaps Jin-won has fallen in love with Ji-wan-ji-ha. Jin-won didn't have enough courage when he saw Jae-young-ha disappointed after Jin-won said they should stop. Jin-won knew that Jin-won should end this relationship, but Jin-won's heart didn't want to do that. Jin-won couldn't say those words. Perhaps this is Jin-won's own selfishness, but Jin-won wants Jae-young-ha to be happy in the remaining 2 weeks. After that, Jin-won went to the real estate app and chose a house after Jin-won quit working at Ginga's place. This is Jin-won's first step in many ways that Jin-won has thought of. Only this way is the best. That day, Jin-won's sister asked Jin-won why he suddenly wanted to give up. Jin-won said that because Jin-won wanted to focus on the exam and seeing that Jae-young-ha was also close to him, Ji-wan-ji-ha could also take care of Ji-wan-ji-ha himself, so Jin-won didn't need to help Ji-wan-ji-ha anymore. I know you two have been together for so long that it's hard to say goodbye. Jin-won said that Jin-won will leave here in a week. While watching TV, Ji-wan-ji-ha accidentally saw a video of a cat. Seeing that Ji-wan-ji-ha seemed to like cats, Jin-won asked Ji-wan-ji-ha why he didn't raise one. Ji-wan-ji-ha said that Ji-wan-ji-ha didn't have time to take care of it. Leaving it alone would be a pity for it. Jin-won thought to himself, sometimes Jin-won couldn't understand what Ji-wan-ji-ha said, as if Ji-wan-ji-ha unconsciously spoke his mind. Sometimes Jin-won feels annoyed because Jin-won cannot appease Ji-Won and Ji-ha like Jin-won wants. And time just passed regardless of whether Jin-won wanted it or not. Ji-Won and Ji-ha called Jin-won out to give Jin-won a watch. This is a gift to celebrate Jin-won moving to live with Ji-Won and Ji-ha for 100 days. Jin-won didn't expect Ji-Won and Ji-ha to care about Jin-won like that. Ji-Won and Ji-ha says it's very important to Ji-Won and Ji-ha. Meanwhile, Jin-won felt like Jin-won's wrist was on fire, with a feeling of guilt, but also a bit of excitement. Jin-won really liked it, but told Ji-Won and Ji-ha that Jin-won didn't need it. Ji-Won and Ji-ha thought Jin-won was afraid it was expensive, so he said it's okay. It's only 700,000 won, about 14 million. Ji-Won and Ji-ha said that Ji-Won and Ji-ha made Jin-won feel uncomfortable, so he apologized to Jin-won sincerely, but Jin-won didn't think so. The one apologizing should be Jin-won. Jin-won feels that Jin-won does not deserve Ginga's affection. Both of them didn't have much time left. Jin-won liked Ji-Won and Ji-ha, but Jin-won had to say goodbye.
Genha-son.
If Jin-won continues like this, Ji-Won and Ji-ha will be hurt. But Jin-won still wants to treat Ji-Won and Ji-ha well. All these thoughts kept going crazy in Jin-won's head. Jin-won couldn't think clearly anymore. Jin-won also doesn't know what he's doing anymore. After a few small rounds, Jin-won was so tired that he fell asleep. Ji-Won and Ji-ha gently walked over to caress Jin-won, then helped Jin-won wash up. Ji-Won and Ji-ha doesn't feel so tired in his heart anymore. Ji-Won and Ji-ha knows that Jin-won likes Ji-Won and Ji-ha, but Jin-won doesn't want to accept it. So Jin-won avoids Ji-Won and Ji-ha. But it's okay because time will tell everything. Ji-Won and Ji-ha will wait until Jin-won accepts this feeling. That's what Ji-Won and Ji-ha needs to do. But Ji-Won and Ji-ha doesn't know why Ji-Won and Ji-ha always feels insecure inside. The next morning, Ji-Won and Ji-ha had to go see the TR Jinwon exhibition before the family, because Ginga's grandmother wanted Ji-Won and Ji-ha to go there. Before leaving, Ji-Won and Ji-ha gently touched Jinwon's cheek and told Jin-won not to skip meals. Jin-won had to cook something and eat it deliciously. Seeing Jin-won's face filled with fatigue, Ji-Won and Ji-ha was worried. But Jin-won told Ji-Won and Ji-ha that Jin-won was okay. It was because Jin-won stayed up late to study. After that, Jin-won told Ji-Won and Ji-ha to quickly go to his family's place. See you tomorrow, and then gave Ji-Won and Ji-ha a kiss goodbye. At this time, Ji-Won and Ji-ha was drinking tea and talking with his grandmother. After that, Ginga's grandmother asked Ji-Won and Ji-ha why didn't Ji-Won and Ji-ha go back to his family. There will be many things to worry about when living alone. She thinks it will be better if Ji-Won and Ji-ha stays with his parents until Ji-Won and Ji-ha graduates. Ji-Won and Ji-ha said that Ji-Won and Ji-ha had an uncle to take care of his, so she didn't need to worry. She told Ji-Won and Ji-ha that he would only take care of Ji-Won and Ji-ha this month, so she called a new maid for Ji-Won and Ji-ha. Ji-Won and Ji-ha doesn't understand what's going on. After returning home, I saw Jin-won talking to the new maid. At this time, Ginga's face darkened. Then he asked the maid if he could leave, because Ji-Won and Ji-ha had something to tell Jin-won. Ji-Won and Ji-ha asked Jin-won if there was anything he wanted to tell Ji-Won and Ji-ha. Jin-won apologized for not telling Ji-Won and Ji-ha sooner. Without waiting for Jin-won to finish speaking, Ji-Won and Ji-ha pushed Jin-won Jin-won against the wall. It seemed like Jin-won didn't remember Ji-Won and Ji-ha saying what Ji-Won and Ji-ha would do to Jin-won if Jin-won ran away. He said that Jin-won didn't forget, it was just Jin-won pretending. If it makes Ji-Won and Ji-ha happy, then Ji-Won and Ji-ha just do it. Ji-Won and Ji-ha asked Jin-won what was going on just yesterday. Both of them were very happy, but Jin-won told Ji-Won and Ji-ha that this is not as simple as Ji-Won and Ji-ha thinks, and this relationship needs to end. Ji-Won and Ji-ha couldn't believe that the two of them hadn't officially known each other yet. Why did Jin-won think like that? Jin-won didn't need to make it public. Ji-Won and Ji-ha just didn't wait for Ji-Won and Ji-ha to finish talking. Jin-won told Ji-Won and Ji-ha to stop being stupid. Stop pretending and accept the truth. You both need to stop this. This shouldn't have happened in the first place. Jin-won blames himself. Jin-won should have told Ji-Won and Ji-ha everything clearly, but Jin-won didn't do. Ji-Won and Ji-ha repeated what Jin-won had said to Ji-Won and Ji-ha before. He couldn't choose who he liked. Jin-won couldn't control Jin-won's feelings. He didn't have time to stop and think about who to choose. Both of them simply fell in love, but why couldn't Jin-won do the same as him? Jin-won interrupted Ji-Wen-ji-ha and said that maybe this was Ginga's first time. But Jin-won knew how this relationship would end. When the small differences piled up, the two people who seemed inseparable would end up as strangers, and the days spent together will disappear from his life. Good memories will turn into nightmares that Ji-Wen-ji-ha won't want to forget. Jin-won doesn't want that to happen to him. Ji-Wen-ji-ha said that Ji-Wen-ji-ha wouldn't be like that, but Ji-Wen-ji-ha couldn't say anything in advance. Ji-Wen-ji-ha loudly told Jin-won that we both don't know. So why keep thinking about it, let's just start and... Before finishing speaking, Jin-won immediately told Ji-Wen-ji-ha that Ji-Wen-ji-ha thinks this uncle-nephew relationship can really be possible. Why? Love can't solve everything, and this is when Ji-Wen-ji-ha has to face the truth. Ginga's tears fell down. Ji-Wen-ji-ha said that Ji-Wen-ji-ha didn't want to end like that. Why did Jin-won always decide everything if Jin-won determined everything like that? Why did Jin-won still treat him well? Jin-won told Ji-Wen-ji-ha that because Jin-won feels guilty and Jin-won doesn't know what Jin-won should do. If Jin-won felt guilty, Jin-won shouldn't have done this. Jin-won thought it would be better for Jin-won to do this. So he treated Ji-Wen-ji-ha well one last time and then secretly left his life. No matter what Jin-won says, Ji-Wen-ji-ha is making a fool of himself. Ji-Wen-ji-ha fell too deeply into this dream and was betrayed by Jin-won. Jin-won said Jin-won had prepared for this, so let's play around one last time. And then Jin-won did what Ji-Wen-ji-ha told him and the punishment process began. And then whatever happens, it's time for punishment. Maybe my body is unstable tonight. I pity you. The choice that Jin-won thought wouldn't hurt him, but it was the worst choice. Actually, that was the only decision Jin-won could make. Jin-won hurt Ji-Wen-ji-ha too much and made Jin-won's emotions chaotic. In that moment, Jin-won wanted him so much. Jin-won thought Jin-won was a bastard. After doing what needed to be done, Ji-Wen-ji-ha sat alone on the sofa and burst into tears. It's been 1 month since Jin-won left. It's winter now, and Ginga's life continues like that since Jin-won left. The whole sky seemed to collapse, and Ji-Wen-ji-ha didn't die of pain. It's just that every time he remembered him, Ji-Wen-ji-ha wondered what Jin-won was doing now. Ji-Wen-ji-ha has not contacted Jin-won since that day. Nothing will change if Ji-Wen-ji-ha contacts you. Ji-Wen-ji-ha loves him, but Jin-won is still his uncle. Ji-Wen-ji-ha cherished those happy moments, so Ji-Wen-ji-ha acted like a child. Ji-Wen-ji-ha thought if Jin-won had the same feelings for him, but that didn't happen, so Ji-Wen-ji-ha let Jin-won go. Because Ji-Wen-ji-ha loved him so much, Ji-Wen-ji-ha wanted more, but that broke Ginga's heart into thousands of pieces. Ji-Wen-ji-ha was in so much pain and wanted Jin-won to be the same. But ironically, love made Ji-Wen-ji-ha cruel. Like what Jin-won said, Ji-Wen-ji-ha began to think about what Jin-won had given him. It was only after Ji-Wen-ji-ha lost him that he realized that Ji-Wen-ji-ha saw Jin-won as family. Ji-Wen-ji-ha loves spending time with him. Before, Ji-Wen-ji-ha was used to living alone. But Jin-won made Ji-Wen-ji-ha realize how nice it is to have someone to talk to. Sure, Ji-Wen-ji-ha liked him. But Jin-won was just a passing person in his life, someone to whom Ji-Wen-ji-ha could confide his thoughts. Now Ji-Wen-ji-ha has realized that Ji-Wen-ji-ha lost everything just because of his stubbornness. Jin-won was so worried about him, and what was going through Jin-won's mind when he stopped Ji-Wen-ji-ha that day. Ji-Wen-ji-ha wished she had never loved him, but it was too late. It had already happened. Jin-won is the only one for him, so Ji-Wen-ji-ha wants to apologize to that Jin-won one last time. On this side, Jin-won is talking to someone close to him. After leaving him, Jin-won moved to a small house and spent all night studying. Jin-won wants to forget you, but every time he rests, Jin-won remembers you. Jin-won pushed himself to the limit and fainted, forcing him to go to the hospital. Jin-won did not tell his family about this incident, because Jin-won did not want Ji-Wen-ji-ha to find him. After that incident, Jin-won realized that Jin-won could not forget him. Jin-won told Gyujong everything, but to me Ji-Wen-ji-ha, it was just a Ji-Wen-ji-ha love story. Jin-won thought that when he told everything, Jin-won's heart would feel lighter. But Jin-won knew that he already loved Ji-Wen-ji-ha. That feeling still remained and did not disappear. Jin-won turned his back to say goodbye to Gyujong, then suddenly called Jin-won-hyung. Jin-won turned around and saw Ji-Wen-ji-ha standing behind him. The two looked at each other and awkwardly asked about their health. Young Liucong saw this and understood the problem. Jiwei and Jiha added fuel to the fire to rekindle their love. Jiwei and Jiha kept glancing at Liucong. This young man knew that he was the brightest light bulb in this area, so he walked away without needing anyone to remind him before leaving. Still trying a little to say that Jiwei and Jiha hopes that Jiwei and Jiha did the right thing. Nothing will happen? Jiwei and Jiha ignored Jinwon and entered the house with a wild face like, "Did you really sell Jinwon to a guy?" As soon as he entered the house, Jiwei and Jiha asked Jinwon why Jinwon lived in the bathroom. Jinwon said that this is a simple house model. Jiwei and Jiha looked at Jinwon, who had become much thinner, and felt sad. Jinwon asked Jiwei and Jiha why Jiwei and Jiha knew where Jinwon was. Jiwei and Jiha installed GPS on his phone, so Jiwei and Jiha found him. Jiwei and Jiha knew it was illegal to do so, but because he was so desperate, he did it. Jiwei and Jiha said Jiwei and Jiha came here to apologize to Jinwon for what he did. Jiwei and Jiha knew this relationship was over before Jiwei and Jiha could do anything. They cannot become lovers for him. Jinwon is very special. The time spent with him, Jiwei and Jiha was very happy. In his heart, Jinwon thought that as long as Jiwei and Jiha returned to the main house, they would both be fine. That's all Jinwon needed. But why did Jinwon's tears fall like that? Jinwon doesn't want to destroy everything. Things need to go back to how they were before. Jiwei and Jiha hugged him tightly. Her eyes were red, tears welling up. Jinwon didn't want Jiwei and Jiha to leave. Jinwon apologized to him. Jinwon tried his best to forget him, but Jinwon couldn't. Jinwon always waits for Jiwei and Jiha like a fool. Today when Jinwon saw Jiwei and Jiha coming, he was really happy. Jinwon knew that Jinwon shouldn't be like that, but Jinwon was waiting for that to happen. Jinwon's heart broke thinking that Jiwei and Jiha would be fine if Jinwon wasn't there. Jinwon pretended to be an adult and said that the two could not continue this relationship, but Jinwon destroyed everything. Jinwon apologized to Jiwei and Jiha because Jinwon already loved Jiwei and Jiha. He told Jinwon that he thought their relationship was over. It felt like a dream. If this is really a dream, then Jinwon won't feel guilty for liking Jiwei and Jiha. But once again, when he wakes up, Jinwon will be angry and hurt when he realizes it's not true. In that case, Jinwon will choose kindness. The ending will not always be tragic. After that, the two of them came here together, rekindled their old love, and did what they should do. After re-establishing their old love, the two hugged each other happily while holding the person they loved in their arms. Jinwon knew he couldn't give Jinwon anything other than this great love. Jaeyoung-ha wants to be happy with Jinwon forever after. Jaeyoung-ha hates being disadvantaged because he's just a kid and can't do anything for Jinwon. Jinwon gently told Jaeyoung-ha not to hate himself for it. Jinwon was the one in pain but couldn't do anything. Both have to live in a life full of fear from now on, and when the last straw is over, both will start to hate each other. But now, Jinwon's love for Jaeyoung-ha is much greater than before. Jinwon apologized to him because right now Jinwon could only do that. Jaeyoung-ha said Jinwon reassured himself like that. He was very serious and said he loved Jinwon very much. So, let's see where the future takes us. After all, Jinwon finally returned to Ginga's house as if nothing had happened. Jinwon never thought he would step into this house again. He hugged Jinwon and told Jinwon not to think about leaving here anymore, to live happily together from now on. Jinwon wanted to cry because Jinwon was so happy to return to this house. It felt like coming home. While making dinner, Jinwon's sister called, hoping Jinwon wouldn't work too hard. Jinwon still has a lot of plans to study to prepare for the exam and many other things. Meanwhile, Jinwon boasted that he would help Jinwon with housework like washing dishes and that. As soon as he finished showing off, Jiwei and Jiha hugged him from behind. Jiwei and Jiha asked Jinwon what he was doing behind Ginga's back. Jinwon kept whispering in his heart, "What we're doing now is shady." Then you let Jinwon know how shady it is, ahihi. Jinwon knows that both of them cannot set expectations like what they both want, because they are still too immature and slowly move forward without knowing what their destiny will be. And Jinwon decided that Jinwon wouldn't worry about what would appear at the end of the road, because it's not enough that Jinwon loves Jiwei and Jiha. It's not very difficult for this relationship to go undetected. Ji-ha and Jin-won did not see each other outside, nor did anyone visit the house. So Jin-won was caught off guard and this unfortunate situation arose. While eating, they both sat and discussed his sister, then accidentally got the same dish, so he gave it to him. Yesterday Ji-ha ate a lot and forgot to ask the maid to wrap it up to bring some home. It looked like he really liked this gajang dish. Jin-won wanted to buy it for him but couldn't because those places made it very salty. And the next day, Jin-won went to Jinwon's sister's house to ask for some gajang to bring back to Ji-ha. She wanted Jin-won to stay and drink tea, but Jin-won had already found a job and refused, not wanting to meet Jinwon in-law. However, just as he refused and was about to leave, Ginga's son-in-law Jin-won came home. The three talked for a while, then he went home but couldn't see him, so Ji-ha immediately took out his phone and called him. But at that time his father answered the phone and finally this awkward situation appeared. 4 pairs of eyes looked at each other. The other three's eyes were carefree, and his eyes were a bit sneaky. Ji-ha quietly asked why Jin-won appeared here. Jin-won was confused and said that human sins made Jin-won come here and Jin-won would pay the price for that. Everyone chatted happily. This was truly a family meal like any other family. Jin-won felt very proud, and Ji-ha smiled and talked happily in front of everyone. But at that moment there were also thoughts that flashed through his mind. Jin-won feels like he is a barrier separating the happiness of the three of them. After that, his father took out wine and wanted the two of them to stay one night, and agreed, while Jin-won was confused and didn't know what was going on. After drinking, they both went to their room to sleep. Jin-won was thinking whether Jinwon's nephew was handsome or cute. While next to Jin-won there was a nephew hugging Jin-won tightly. Jin-won chased him away because while drinking with Ginga's parents, he whispered to Jin-won so Jin-won didn't want to sleep with him. Seeing that Jin-won was so miserable, Ji-ha ate Jin-won. But in the middle of the favor, the maid came and ruined the fun and private space of the two. After the maid told Jin-won to blame him, he was so angry that Jin-won was angry with Ji-ha and went to sleep. However, he decided not to forgive Jin-won and then, what happened after that, everyone understood. After working hard all night, the next day they both went home. Jin-won is always welcomed by Younga's family, and Jinwon's day off has ended. Even though it was a rather stressful day for Jin-won, and Jin-won didn't want it to happen again. After that time it made Ji-ha realize something new and feel excited. After watching a movie and going out to eat, Jin-won asked Ji-ha what was going on today that made Ji-ha do these things with Jin-won. Ji-ha said that today was his birthday. Jin-won apologized to Ji-ha for forgetting his birthday. Jin-won said that Jin-won really wanted to make something special for him. At that moment, Ji-ha also had something to ask Jin-won to do. So Ji-ha went into the room to get a box. When I opened it, it was real and had a zingy knot in the top. And Ji-ha wanted Jin-won to wear it. After wearing it, Ji-ha saw that Jin-won was very kiwi with mlem and decided to kill Jin-won too. Both are still passionate and immersed in their happiness. Because he worked so hard, Jin-won fell asleep without even realizing it. While sleeping, Jin-won dreamed that he was in a kingdom, insulted the Rabbit King, and was expelled from the kingdom. When he woke up, Jin-won decided to clean up and seal all those things. After finishing, Jinwon's cheeks turned red and he asked Ji-ha if he liked it. Ji-ha said Ji-ha really liked it. Then Jin-won walked away embarrassed. Jin-won said that next year Jin-won will definitely give him a gift. Ji-ha is really looking forward to the birthday gift that Jin-won will give him next year. Winter is coming. There are only 2 weeks left before Jin-won will take the civil service exam. Because the exam was about to take place, Jin-won told Ji-ha to cultivate his mind, and Ji-ha also understood and agreed with him. One night after declaring that he couldn't, Jin-won heard rustling sounds and opened his eyes to see Ji-ha sitting on Jin-won and preparing to kill him. When he woke up, Jinwon's face was confused. That thirst for love begins as small waves rising on the stream of emotions. But when we try to suppress it, we accidentally create a huge wave. Maybe that's why Jin-won dreamed like that, because it's been an hour since he kept thinking like that, and Jin-won still hasn't learned anything. So Jin-won decided to hang out for a bit, so he wouldn't miss the other person. On this side, Ji-Won and Ji-ha was preparing to go to bed, when it was announced that class would be cancelled this afternoon. So Ji-Won and Ji-ha left earlier than usual. As soon as he got home, he heard a strange sound. Ji-Won and Ji-ha immediately ran into the room and saw Jin-won. Why should Ji-Won and Ji-ha hesitate anymore? The rice is already at his mouth, so he has to eat. After eating and being mentally full, the two decided to rest here and go eat. But when I thought I was resting, Ji-Won and Ji-ha took out a cake and put it on Jin-won and started the nth round. While working, Jin-won told Ji-Won and Ji-ha that the exam was coming up, but Jin-won hadn't learned anything yet, and he was often failing. Jin-won apologizes because Jin-won is such a bad uncle. After that, Ji-Won and Ji-ha asked Jin-won something a bit tense, which was that if he passes the exam, there will be no more problems, but if Jin-won becomes a civil servant, how will Jin-won talk about Ji-Won and Ji-ha to his family? He was sweating and Jin-won had never thought about this. Ji-Won and Ji-ha wanted to tell his family when Ji-Won and Ji-ha decided to live with Jin-won because Ji-Won and Ji-ha liked him. Ji-Won and Ji-ha doesn't care whether Jin-won passes or fails this exam. Ji-Won and Ji-ha will raise Jin-won, so Jin-won doesn't need to worry. Ji-Won and Ji-ha will take good care of Jin-won. Ji-Won and Ji-ha will become the breadwinner of the family, and Jin-won will support Ji-Won and Ji-ha to build it. Jin-won felt like what Ji-Won and Ji-ha said was like Ji-Won and Ji-ha kissing Jin-won. Ji-Won and Ji-ha had absolutely no plan at all. Jin-won blamed himself, but was happy to see Ji-Won and Ji-ha smiling happily like this, looking so cute. Jin-won wishes that the future that Ji-Won and Ji-ha is drawing will come true. No one can predict whether a bright future awaits them or a dark one, because life will guide us, and we cannot predict it. But this is something that Jin-won could never have expected. In the end, Jin-won also became a civil servant but was fired due to an unnecessary accident, and Jin-won became his butler. After returning from abroad, Ji-Won and Ji-ha dressed very manly and came to talk to him. Jin-won wondered why Ji-Won and Ji-ha was dressed like this, looking like he was about to do business. Ji-Won and Ji-ha happily told Jin-won that Ji-Won and Ji-ha had already established his own company in the States. Ji-Won and Ji-ha did not accept help from Ginga's father, so now the company is very small. But Ji-Won and Ji-ha wanted Jin-won to come and be Ginga's personal secretary, and so Ji-Won and Ji-ha agreed. After reporting the company's situation, Jin-won asked Ji-Won and Ji-ha if he could give Jin-won a private room for his secretary. Then Ji-Won and Ji-ha said no, because the company didn't have the budget for that. Then Ginga's left hand just worked like Ginga's usual routine. Ji-Won and Ji-ha touched Jin-won all over and asked why Jin-won wanted to move the table outside. Well, Ji-Won and Ji-ha asked very senselessly and stupidly coming from his position. Ji-Won and Ji-ha said he couldn't, because he was afraid that if Jin-won went out there, everyone would be captivated by Jin-won. While confused, Jin-won accidentally spilled a glass of water. Fortunately, the water didn't get on the computer, but it got on Ji-Won and Ji-ha and forced Jin-won to clean it for him. While rinsing his mouth, because someone put something in that shouldn't be put in while working, Ji-Won and Ji-ha told Jin-won that next month he and Ji-Won and Ji-ha would go to Seoul, so that Jin-won could meet his nephew and niece. He still felt embarrassed when he met his father, but because Jin-won felt that what Ji-Won and Ji-ha said made sense, it was okay. Jin-won felt uncomfortable because of that. Jin-won also did not want such things to happen again. Ji-Won and Ji-ha turned around and called Jin-won affectionately and said that Ji-Won and Ji-ha didn't tell Jin-won about this because Ji-Won and Ji-ha was afraid that Jin-won would worry. But Ginga's parents already knew about their relationship. Jin-won stood bewildered for 5 seconds. Ginga's father once asked Ji-Won and Ji-ha if Jin-won and Ji-Won and Ji-ha chose to go to the States to live because of their relationship, and if that was a problem then they both didn't need to go. Ginga's father seemed very calm when talking about it, and he also said that whatever happens, happens. Jin-won thought that because of that, Ji-Won and Ji-ha wanted to arrange his work and return to Korea. Ji-Won and Ji-ha said it wasn't like that. Ji-Won and Ji-ha wanted to know how far he could go without the help of Ginga's father, and if he wanted to do so, Ji-Won and Ji-ha needed his help. As long as Jin-won is by his side, Ji-Won and Ji-ha has the feeling that Ji-Won and Ji-ha can do everything. So Ji-Won and Ji-ha hopes Jin-won will relax and not think too much, because GY and Jiha can take care of him. And finally, GY and Jiha did not forget to convince Jin-won to return to Korea and meet his father and sister. Ginga's face was glowing like that. Just let me worry about Jin-won taking care of me every night. And then the two decided to return to Korea together next month and meet his parents. So GY and Jiha called Ginga's parents and told them in advance that GY and Jiha and Jin-won would return next month.